I shoved my Nano Drive into the port on the side of the computer and activated the prompts when they came up on the screen. I could have done it vocally, but since what I was doing was illegal, it seemed safer to use the touchscreen instead. The drive I had just installed was a rod of nanocircuitry about the size of a AAA battery, and could contain up to 64 zettabytes of information. This was way too much storage in my opinion. I could download a virtual version of the Library of Congress, send my virtual avatar walking up and down the aisles of the building, and have him pick out a book at random and actually read the book that I had selected. And the program would only take up 3 exabytes of storage. But that was the way tech worked best, by showing humans just how slow and clumsy we are. For example, the Nano Drive I had just plugged into the computer had to be made by computers. Humans weren't fast enough to handle all the little details that went into making one. I had seen a documentary on PBS about it. Nano drives, which is the cute name for the crystals that are grown to store information, are grown in a vat filled with nanomachines assemblers, disassemblers, and computers. All of them work together to grow a crystal tube capable of storing information in a certain way. And they do it molecule by molecule at a speed that humans can't replicate. A square vat of nanomachines 20 centimeters long by 20 centimeters wide can create 100 nano drives in 4 hours. And that is including time for mistakes to crop up and for the machines in the vat to figure out the problem and find a solution. A perfect run, which happens 23% of the time, takes 3 hours from start to finish. Using a human to oversee the work and make adjustments as they are needed would slow the process down so much that those 100 drives would take 325 years to complete. Some people believe that it proves just how incredible humans are to be able to create something that can outstrip our own abilities to oversee what is happening. It just makes me feel small and insignificant. But that wasn't a concern of mine currently. Today is take your kids to work day, and Dad had brought me to work once again. My name is Ben Cooper and I am 11 years old. I stand 147 centimeters tall and weight 50 kilograms. And my body is showing every sign of being ready to commence with puberty. This is something I have been dreading for almost 3 years. When I was 8 years old, Dad had brought me to work with him and explained what he did here. He was the supervisor in charge of VAT 378-N. And he was in charge of making sure that when the products left the vat they were alive and ready for transport. It wasn't a difficult job from what I saw. I probably could have done it myself if child labor laws didn't prohibit a person from working until they were 16. 14 if they were going to be working in a family business. The nanomachines of VAT 378-N did one job and one job only. Cows would be led into the building and into individual ramps. The vats of nanomachines were below floor level, so the cows would be led to the vats, which to the cows looked like pools of water. They would enter the vats and the walkways would be retracted so that the cows would have no way to leave. The nanomachines would then scour the cow for signs of the protein which causes mad cow disease. If the protein was found, it would be changed into a more harmless protein. And the cow would then leave the vat none the worse for wear, and totally unaware of what had just happened to it. Last year I saw a cow with obvious signs of the disease lowered into a vat and come out an hour later totally healthy and able to move on its own. The program I had loaded finished making the changes that I wanted and flashed another prompt. This time I didn't activate the program. I needed to be in the vat before the program ran, because I would only get one shot at this. What I wanted to do was dangerous and illegal. If it worked the way I thought that it would, I was unlikely to face prosecution. But if something went wrong, there would probably all sorts of lawsuits. Why was I doing this? I was literally taking my own life in my hands. Years ago, I had an idea that had both scared me and excited me. If a cow which was obviously sick could be cured using nanomachines, then maybe I could be cured using the same technology. So I did some amateur research and found out that what I was experiencing wasn't unknown. I had until then believed that I was the only person who felt the way I did. But as is often true in life, I wasn't alone. There were terms and definitions that changed depending on which website I was looking at, but one thing stayed the same. I wasn't mentally ill. My disease, disability, or whatever you wanted to call it wasn't something that was understood well, but enough people had studied it that some understanding had been reached. My physical body was betraying me. It was healthy enough, but what was wrong with it went so far outside the realm of what I thought was possible that it took me weeks to accept the possibility that it might be true. But I wanted to be sure. I needed to be sure. What I was contemplating had far-reaching consequences, and while I didn't know what all the costs might be, I did know that if what I had read was correct, my whole life was going to have to change for me to be the person I was supposed to be. So I did some more research and found a test that could give me the answers I needed. The Nemo test was a little more complicated than an EKG, but not by much, and it had a 100% success rate in detecting the very thing I was looking for. Unfortunately, the Nemo test isn't something you can ask the school nurse to perform on you. And at the time I could find no information on anywhere in the state that I could take the test. Berkeley in California was running the test day and night, hoping to gain as large a sample of the population as possible. But there was no way my folks could afford to send me to California just to take a test for something that I didn't want to tell them about until I knew for sure that it applied to me. And then I had my 9th birthday. And something told me that there was something wrong in the Cooper family. I didn't know for sure that something was wrong, but Mom and Dad usually were a lot more touchy-feely on special occasions like birthdays. That year, however, they were rarely in the same room together. I got the laptop I wanted, and some of the software that I had asked for. I had said it was so that I could put videos on the web, and I did do that as a cover. But what I was really using it for was facial recognition. Only I wasn't trying to find a criminal like they show on those TV programs. I was trying to find women who shared similar facial features to mine. Most of the time the results were not pretty. But there were a few girls who seemed pretty enough. The problem was that I was a child and my face hadn't matured any more than the rest of me. It seemed that I was going to have to wait until I grew up to find out if I was going to be hideous or not. It didn't seem fair that I could eat healthy, exercise, do well in school, and still wind up looking like I went 3 rounds against the heavyweight champ. Looking around, I saw that no one was acting as if anything was out of the ordinary. Father had gone into the office to double-check that everything had ended for the day. Sometimes a special order would come in, and somebody in the office would forget to say anything. And so the technicians who oversaw the organic nanomachines would put them into standby mode, and everything would go to hell in a handbasket while the techs had to restart the nanites, which could take anywhere from a half hour to 3 hours depending on how long they had been on standby. Dad had left me the task of securing the nanomachines without putting them in standby. Instead, I had installed a new program to the nanomachines that they would begin running as soon as I activated the start button on an application that I had ready on my phone. The button flashed a red ready button like an accusation. I knew this might get me and my dad into some trouble. But this was something that I needed to do. Just like Mom, I guess. I was 9 years old and some things were finally going my way, and then Mom left. Right out of the blue, she packed up her bags and walked out the door, leaving me and my younger brother Sam to my father. Financially we were fine, but Dad is an extroverted man's man, while I was much more introverted and shy. This is a common occurrence for the eldest child. Sam is much more extroverted, and while not a clone of our father, there have been jokes made about the possibility. So after Mom left, I entered a state of depression. I hadn't been any closer to Mom than I had been to Dad, but I also wasn't estranged. Mom was Mom, and I had thought that she would always be there. It was a shock to my system, and my mind temporarily crashed on me. I wasn't a vegetable, but I was even less social than I had been before she left. Sam noticed a week after I stopped coming out of my room. Except for school, it took Dad a month. And then something happened which helped me in more ways than I can describe. Dad had me start going to a shrink. He had great medical coverage, so it wasn't going to cost anything unless I needed medication. So I had someone to talk to about what I was feeling, and this person wouldn't say anything to my dad about it unless I gave her the okay. And since she wasn't related to me, I could be fairly sure that she wouldn't judge me unfairly. And so after 2 months of footing around what I wanted to say, I dropped the bombshell on her, and she reacted as if it had been obvious from the beginning. All the fear and anguish I had been feeling about confessing to her what I had been agonizing over for literally years, and she acted as if it was just another day. To say I felt cheated is an understatement. But at the same time, I was relieved that this was a shock to her. And it turned out that Dr. Chandelier not only knew about the Nemo Yarosho test. She could have me take the test to confirm my suspicions. It took another month before I could take the test, a month in which I just about drove Sam and my dad crazy. Because for the first time since I had comprehended the situation I was in, I was contemplating telling them the whole truth. And so I would tell them at meals that I had something to tell them and then chicken out. Or right out of the blue while watching TV. It got so bad that Dad told me at one point that I was not allowed to tell them anything about anything for the rest of the weekend. And then came the day of the test, and I got some good news and some very bad news. And it was the same news. I am a girl trapped in a boy's body. I had known for years that there was something different about me, but I didn't know what it could be. And then when I was 7, the networks were airing a trial in which the defendants had killed a boy who liked dressing up as a girl. I don't remember the girl's name, but I do remember that the men managed to get the charges reduced to manslaughter, and only 3 of the 8 men went to prison. I also remember that it was the first time that the thought that a boy could dress up like a girl entered my mind. And now I knew for sure that I was a girl. I had been so afraid that I was mistaken or something that I had made sure to act as masculine as I could. Not because I thought that there was anything wrong with a boy being a girl on the inside. It was because I was afraid that I was wrong, and would be ridiculed for my desire to dress like a girl. I was a kid, give me a break. Even now that I am 11, I still fear that this is going to turn out to be a case of indigestion or something. And how is being right bad news? Because I took the test results home with me and showed my father. He couldn't handle the fact that his son should have been his daughter. He refused to even consider my feelings in the matter. Instead, he blamed the psychiatrist and attempted to sue her. That didn't end well. Sam found out and took every opportunity to denigrate me in front of Dad. If I hadn't been bigger than him, I think he would have been quite violent towards me. As it was, the entire school found out, and while some kids didn't care, there were some kids who thought it was a holy sign from God to torment me. Fortunately, since Dad refused to allow me to wear dresses, the teasing only lasted until someone else screwed up and took their attention away from me. I never again raised the issue with my father again, and made sure to act in the most masculine way I could. And something within me died. Or at least was severely damaged. A whole year went by in which I kept my head down, my grades up, and my sanity was nowhere to be found. I could go from happy to sad in an eye blink, and I was suddenly the most forgetful person this side of an old folks' home. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was more like I couldn't take the time to care about the things that were going on around me. I felt that everyone was out to get me. I wouldn't have trusted a police officer if he told me that the sun was shining brightly. Part of it was that the few friends that I had thought were on my side disappeared when my desire to be a girl came to light. I was suddenly taboo, an outsider without the coolness of being an outsider. I was an outcast, a pariah. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was good at disappearing, I would probably have gotten in a lot more fights than I did. 9 may have started out being a good year, but it quickly became one of the worst years of my life. And now here I was putting my skill at disappearing to good use. It's not like I can move through walls or cause light to bend around me. Instead, it is a lot more like acting. I keep my head down, focused on the phone in my hand as if I were getting updates sent to it. I move at half speed as if I am not totally paying attention to where I am going. And I don't look around at other people. That is the hardest thing. People who have something to hide always look around them to see if anyone else has noticed that they are acting strangely. I had worn a suit similar to my dad's today. It wouldn't fool anyone looking at me. But glimpsed on the peripheral, I would blend into the environment. I was just one other tech checking the data from the vats of nano machines. Was it working? Was I blending into the background? In all honesty, probably not. My dad stands 180 centimeters tall. And even at a distance, I am not going to pass for him. But the clothes gave me confidence. So even if it was luck, it didn't matter to me. I had the confidence to try, and that was all I needed. As I walked to the edge of the vat, I discovered that I did need one more thing after all. It was VAT 378-N that gave me a reason to live. One morning I woke up and remembered everything I had been told about nanites, and I began to make my plans. I knew how to use a computer pretty well, but I had never focused myself on coding before. Coding is the current phrase used by people who invent and change software to fit a need. All it means is that I can cause a computer to act in a manner that I desire. And since I suddenly had a need to cause one specific computer to do one specific thing, I had thought that my task would be simple. I was wrong. What I wanted VAT 378-N to do had never been done before. Oh, what it was doing now was similar to what I needed, but it turned out that the differences were big enough that I couldn't simply cut and paste something and have the VAT do what I wanted. I was going to have to design and install a piece of code without being caught or causing the computer controlling the VAT to shut down. By my 10th birthday, I had read half the books in the public library on coding. 3 of the kids in the computer club were testing and teaching me. Dad was still disappointed that I wasn't going to suddenly turn into a jock, but he seemed happier than he had been. Sam, however, knew that I was up to something. Or at least he thought that I was. And he stuck even closer to me than he had the first month he had been given the job of following me. 6 months after my 10th birthday, I was again taken to Dad's job with Sam. It wasn't hard to grab a copy of the operating system without Dad realizing it. Sam, however, had been much more difficult to get around. I had actually needed help in distracting him long enough for me to complete the copying. And that help came in the beautiful form of Naomi Brown. I had been hounded by my little brother all day. The little shit had taken every opportunity to question me and what I was doing. If he had actually cared about what I was learning, it might have been fun. But on 3 separate occasions he had asked me about what I was doing on something that he had questioned me about before. Naomi, who was graduating college that year, had come to the plant for 2 reasons. The first was college-related. She needed to spend time in a plant that used nanites and write up a proposal on the positives and negatives related to having nano machines at a job site. The second reason she was there was that her father actually worked at the plant and she had wanted to spend some time with him the way she had when she was younger. Naomi had actually been at the plant for a week before the kids showed up, and she was scheduled to be there for a second week after we left. During lunch in the cafeteria, she had asked to sit at the table I was sitting at, and without waiting for an answer, I was suddenly looking across at a very beautiful college student who stirred things inside of me that made me realize that I was never going to please my father. She had high cheekbones and full lips, and stood on the high side of 170-something centimeters. If I had been a normal boy, I would have probably entered puberty at that moment. Instead, I was resentful of her C or D cup chest. No, I couldn't judge them very well. I was 10, for crying out loud. I learned later that they were a C cup and she knew how to use them. I wanted to have her hourglass shape, with hips that were designed to be held onto. I called to order the meeting of kids with demented younger brothers. She said, and I was even jealous of her voice. It promised things without even hinting at them. And I fell in love with her a little. I was never going to be 100% attracted to any woman, but with Naomi I could see and feel a little why others would fall in love with her. It didn't hurt that her skin was dark and flawless. She was the reason why painters still used live models. At least you escaped and are normal, I told her. Evidently there is some sort of almost but not quite psychotic chromosome running through my father's bloodline. I guess I went a little too hard on the self-loathing at that point, but it was hard not to. I had spent a year without anyone I could call a friend or family. Even the school counselor had tried to get me to accept Christ as my personal savior, and to let the power of God remove the wickedness from my soul. If I had been a little older and a little stronger, I probably would have tried to remove the self-righteous look from his face. Instead, I simply left his office, confused as to why I had thought that he would have accepted me for who I was in the first place. "Would you like me to leave?" Naomi asked. "No. I'm sorry, please don't leave," I practically shouted in the small cafeteria. She was the first person I met who didn't seem repulsed by me. Which probably meant that she didn't know who I was, and I wasn't going to tell her anything which might make her leave. It felt good to sit across from someone who didn't look at me like I was some sort of disease. Relax, kid. Anyone ever tell you that you need to turn down your intensity setting to something like half? Sorry. I haven't sat next to someone as beautiful as you before. I told her, hoping that she would think that I was just another kid with a crush on an older girl. "Save it for the blonde squad kid I'm not buying," she said with a smile. That's the problem with people today. I grumped a little. A person tries to be a little romantic and everybody tells him he's an idiot. If I had tried some poetry comparing you to a rose, you probably would have laughed at me. Probably, and you're right, romanticism isn't really that popular in the current culture. Sorry, kid, you were probably born in the wrong century. And that's the reason why there is so much strife in the world. I told her. While I had been learning to code, I had discovered what I thought was an interesting something. It turns out that as romanticism leaves a culture, disagreements escalate into violence much more swiftly than during a romantic period. People who have poetry or art to fall back on don't result to violence in a disagreement as quickly as when romanticism is waning. Well, that and little brothers. So why is your little brother being a jerk? Should I tell you the truth or make up a story about aliens and government conspiracies? Haven't you learned yet? Truth is much stranger than fiction. I want to be a girl, and so my father is having my brother watch me and report if I do anything feminine. Wow, I was expecting something like a childhood rivalry over a broken toy or something like that. Naomi was clearly stunned by my answer. I guess she was used to people being less than honest in their answers to her. Nope, I've been going through hell for the last year or so because I told my father the truth about how I felt. And he's had Sam following me ever since. Wait! You're Ben Cooper, my brother told me about you last year. Her eyes got a faraway look as she tried to remember everything that her brother had told her. While she was doing that, I tried to think about who her brother could be. I didn't know at the time that her brother was actually at the plant that day, or it would have been easy. As it was, I couldn't think of any of the guys at school who might be her brother. I didn't have many friends, and I knew their families, so she wasn't related to a friend. And I had so many kids who tormented me that there were too many to choose from. Oh, by the way, I'm Naomi Brown. She threw that out as if it didn't matter. And maybe it didn't to her, but the name Brown narrowed down who her brother had to be to one person. Dennis Ice Brown. I didn't know why or how he got the nickname Ice. But he had tormented me before he even knew about my desire to wear lace and silk. He was a jock, of course. The jocks and geeks never seemed to be able to get along for some reason. And Ice seemed to get a lot of pleasure from scaring the nerds in school. It was such a shame because he was so hot. His dark skin slid over more muscles than I would ever have. And his face looked like it had been carved from stone, but I was a guy and a nerd, and there was no way that Dennis would ever be anything other than an enemy. It was such a tragedy, because he had the biggest dick in gym class. I can imagine what he told you. Probably, and I must say that I expected you to be somewhat different. What, I'm not girly enough? Not by half, she told me. I was expecting you to be wearing cosmetics and outfits that were poorly coordinated, something between a drag queen and a blind girl with something to prove. That almost brought a smile to my face. If reality hadn't been so bitter, I probably would have laughed. I probably would have been if my dad wasn't such a Neanderthal. Hello, I said as he approached. What are you doing on the floor? Shouldn't you be hiding next to your father? I should have brought a gun. I wouldn't have been able to get it past security, but right then if I had one with me I would have killed Dennis without any difficulty. None of your business what I'm doing, Dennis. Why don't you go bother someone who cares what you think? I was so close to having the one thing that I wanted, and now Dennis Brown was going to take it away from me without even knowing it. The timer was set, and if I wasn't in the pool when it went off, I was going to miss my one opportunity at happiness. There wasn't any disguising what I had done. But none of that would matter if I could only reach the pool in time. Well, I think it is my business, and I'm going to take you to security and they'll find out what you're up to. And then he grabbed my arm and began dragging me towards the security office. Good, when we get there I can tell them that you grabbed me and tried to kiss me. What? He sounded mad. I didn't know if it was from the accusation or the fact that I was going to stand up to him. You heard me, bonehead. When we get in there I'm going to tell everyone that you tried to take advantage of me. Nobody would believe that. But he didn't sound confident and I kept pressing. There were only seconds left, but if I could confuse him enough that he let go of my arm I might make it to the vat in time. Right, but they would believe that the smartest kid in school is up to something simply because the dumbest kid told them he was. And that's when Dennis realized that he had a problem. Getting me into trouble wasn't a problem if something was going wrong. But nothing had happened that he was aware of, and so he had no reason to drag me into security. Of course I needed to distract him before he thought about the fact that he wouldn't drag me to security if he had kissed me. Face it, Dennis, you have made everyone think that I'm some sort of swishy girl. If I start telling everyone that you tried to kiss me, who do you think they are going to believe? Sweet innocent me, or the mean rough football player? As he thought about it, his grip loosened on my arm and I did something that I hadn't believed I would ever do. I hit Dennis Brown in the throat. And as he let go and backed up, I turned and ran for the vat. Looking at my watch, I saw I had 3 seconds to reach the vat. I ran for all I was worth and jumped into the vat 2 seconds late. It didn't seem to matter. Before I even hit the bottom of the vat, I could feel the nanites begin working. Actually, I didn't feel a thing, but I really believed at that moment that I could feel them working on me. They really worked on my clothes. Since everything that I wore was either dead, such as my cotton underwear, or synthetic like my plastic watch, the vat broke it down into its individual molecules and recycled them. Fortunately, hair falls into a strange alive, but dead category, and so long as it is still attached to its roots, the nanites leave them alone. I still lost a few hairs on my head that had been damaged or simply fallen out. As I hit the bottom of the vat, I rolled with the momentum and moved forward and to the right. I was supposed to meet Naomi at that corner, and I remembered the one thing that I had forgotten to plan for. Clothes. I was naked under the obscuring cloud of nanobots. As soon as I climbed out of the vat, whether I was male or female, when I emerged, I was going to be totally and absolutely buck naked. And then I heard the sound I dreaded. Another person had dropped into the vat. Nobody was supposed to see me jump in. Standard procedure was that if anyone fell into one of the vats, the nanites would be placed on standby, and then people would enter the vat and help the person who fell in if he needed help. What the? It was Dennis. He had followed me into the vat, probably planning on doing some damage to the one person who had ever attacked him. But he couldn't see any better than I could in this field of nanites. And he was probably more than a little concerned as his clothes disappeared. If I kept quiet, he probably wouldn't be able to find me, so when I reached the far corner and waited for my program to finish, I curled into the smallest, tightest ball that I could and waited for the program to finish or for Dennis to find me. I heard footsteps above me and hoped that it was Naomi. Although there was nothing she could do to stop her brother from beating me if he found me, I still felt safer with the thought that she was near. After what seemed like forever, I could feel my skin changing. Oh, they weren't getting smaller or larger, but the hairs that were beginning to grow on my forearms fell out and were claimed by the nanites. And the feel of my skin that my hands were touching was softer. And I could feel my chest beginning to produce breasts. That shouldn't have happened. According to everything that I had read, even if the nanites worked as I had planned, it would take up to 9 months for the soft tissue on my body to change, and possible 7 years before my hips changed to those of a girl. Of course, since I still hadn't gone through puberty yet, there was a chance that everything that needed to change would be done in a year or 2. But never in my wildest dreams did I believe that I would see breasts this early. Well, I couldn't see them due to the nanobots, but I could still feel them under my hands. And they felt wonderful. My nipples were even sensitive. I had spent many hours wondering what it felt like to have sensitive nipples. And now, with just a little rubbing, I could feel them sticking straight out, almost straining to reach farther than they currently were. And in the discovery of my newfound girlhood, I totally forgot about Dennis. But suddenly I could hear him approaching. From the sounds he was making, he was following the wall with one hand, waving the other one around in the air. I would hear him take a couple of steps with his hand sliding along the wall. And then he would stop and I would hear him waving his hand through the air. I suppose he could have been doing something differently, but if he was, I wouldn't see it until the nanites cleared. Then I heard the sound that I had been waiting for. The nanites were entering the holding phase that I had programmed them to enter after my program had run out of time. After all, I had done what I wanted to. There was no reason to let the nanites continue to suck up energy. "Here, put this on quick," I heard from Naomi as something landed on my head and flowed down like a sheet. I grabbed it and held it up, trying to understand what I was holding. It took a moment, but I quickly understood that it was a simple sundress, and I stepped into it, quickly pulled it over my now ample bosom. I reached up and grabbed the side of the vat and pulled myself up. I had heaved myself most of the way out of the vat. Glad to see Naomi and the rest of the plant for the first time in what felt like ages. I still had one leg in the vat when Dennis' hand closed on my ankle. I nearly screamed in fright as I felt him grab me. But instead of pulling me back into the vat, Dennis held me firm and pulled himself out of the vat. Or perhaps I should have said herself. I hadn't planned on anyone besides myself being in the vat, so I hadn't set any safety protocols against there being more than one person in the vat at the same time. So the Nanites had done the same thing to Dennis that they had done to me. Dennis now looked like, or rather is, a female with the muscle tone of a bodybuilder. His chest was more rounded than the last time I had seen him naked. And his massive penis was missing. That was a shame, it had been wonderful to see. And the tiny mustache he had been sporting was gone. She looked at me in shock, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And it took a moment to understand that she had been expecting to find Ben Cooper to be climbing out of the vat, not the girl I had become. I fluttered my eyelashes at him and said, "Could you please let go of my leg?" She released it like it was a hot coal and fell back into the vat as she unbalanced herself. I stood up and straightened my dress. Now that I could see again, I was disappointed that the mounds I had felt under my hands were maybe an A cup if someone was scoring them generously. Damn! On the other hand, I had plenty of time for them to grow more. And if they didn't, I could always find a plastic surgeon to give them some help. I smiled at Naomi, but she was looking back at the vat where her brother had fallen in. I could tell she was concerned, but there was nothing she could do. And her brother would be fine. I took her by the arm and guided her out to her car, where she took me to a hotel room she had set up for me until I was ready to meet some people she thought would hire me for my coding skills. A measuring tape told me that I was 32-24-34, which meant I was a 34A cup, maybe a 34A. And I was a size 5 shoe. Which was weird because I had been a size 7. But with those measurements, Naomi went out and picked out a week's worth of clothes for me. And I put on a fashion show for her as I tried on the outfits, and she showed me how I could change things around so that the clothes could be made to stretch into 2 weeks before it was obvious that I didn't have many clothes. That was more than fine with me, but as I put on the different clothes and paraded around the room, I finally felt as if I had found a part of me that had been always missing. I was without a family or immediate means of support. I had no ID, and only 8 grades to my schooling. But for some reason I wasn't afraid of the future. I knew that I would complete high school and go on to college. I knew that I would find a job that would provide me with what I needed to survive and thrive. After all, I was only 11 years old and I had found my soul. Or perhaps my soul had found the body it had been intended for. Either way, I was happy, and I wasn't going to let anything get me down ever again. Even if I couldn't find a job and had to be put into foster care, I wouldn't complain, because I was finally whole. I had overcome the world and made myself whole for the very first time. And then Naomi asked a question that knocked me for a loop. I had thought that I had thought of everything. And with one question, Naomi made me realize that the future might have things in store that I hadn't thought of. Simple things that I might have overlooked. So while I was happy, I also began to wonder, what else had I missed? And more importantly, what was I going to call myself?